I'll be engaging with some interpersonal, mediated, asynchronous communication with you via this slideshow. It's also sort of mass communication because I'm sending the same message to a larger group than just one person. Interpersonal characteristics. So your textbook defines interpersonal communication as two-way interactions between people who are part of a close and irreplaceable relationship in which they treat each other as unique individuals. So think about mediated communication. So that would be a phone call, a text, Skyping with someone, responding to each other's text messages via your phone or on your computer, leaving messages and things on Facebook. Right? There are positive things dealing with mediated communication, available when face-to-face is not. Oftentimes it's non-threatening, so that's why you have trolls and everybody who gets away with some of this communication because they can get away with it. It's also validating, and it could be asynchronous. So asynchronous means it's not happening at the same time. So I can send this message out to you and you can watch this later. Think about these things when you deal with interpersonal communication. How important is attraction? Commonalities, balance, things that you like and appreciate in this other person as well. That person's abilities, are they open? How often do you communicate? And how rewarding is this communication? Think about your relationship with your friends. Is it a young relationship or a more mature one? Have you been friends for a short or a long time? Do you share a lot of information with this person or very little? Is it sort of a friendship that you go out and do things, work out at the gym together, or do you just hang out and just talk? Right? Are there a lot of obligations? You have to meet this person once a week or to communicate often or not as often? Right? Is it with the same sex individual or someone of the other sex? And is it always in person or is it mediated? All these things influence the level and type of communication between two people. Right? Think about your relationships with your family, between a parent and a child, between you and your siblings if you have any, your grandparents and grandchildren, or your extended family. How does that influence your relationship and your history and the time frame with those individuals? And think about your romantic relationships. Do you express love languages, which are more than just I love you and kisses and kind of things like that? It's also doing things for the other person, spending time with that person, simple touch to that person. These are all ways to communicate our romantic feelings to individuals. So let's say we have a relationship. So Knapp came up with this model that sort of shows a relationship from start to finish. See if you have any relationships that have gone through these stages and what stage they might be in right now. The initiation stage, to experimenting, to intensifying, to integrating, and then to bonding. So if we have a relationship escalation model, of course we need to have a termination model. Do you have relationships that are in any of these stages, where you begin to differentiate, circumscribe, stagnate, avoid, and you terminate? Let's think about communication patterns. Do you share affinity with someone? Do you respect the person you have an interpersonal relationship with? Is there a great deal of immediacy, or is that even needed? And who has control? Do you share control, or does one person dominate? Right? Do you talk about your communication? So that's known as meta-communication, talking about communication, communicating about communication. Do you do that? Do you talk about, hey, you don't call enough, or you send some nasty texts? Do you ever have conversations about your communication? We've seen the window before, so let's open it back up again, this one. All right, what about self-disclosure? The Johari window looked at different things that you might disclose to other people. How often do you do that? With whom do you do that? Is there a risk that you take by sharing some things with other people? Is it reciprocated? Can it be constructive or is it destructive? And can it be understandable? So for example, it may not come out in these slides, but I'm a little bit sarcastic. So some of these buttons and pins sort of show exactly how I feel about sarcasm. I think it's a high art form. Right? So I'm sharing with you now that I'm a little bit sarcastic, and hopefully that comes out a little bit, maybe not too much, in these slideshows. Right? You have an assignment in the folders to do something about dialectics. Basically, you have these sort of composed ideas where you have opposites on a continuum. Right? Do you really want to be connected with an individual, or do you want to have autonomy? Usually you fall somewhere in between. And this changes with time and with the person. Right? Are you open with this person, or do you have more privacy with this person? And is it more predictable, or do you want it more spontaneous or novelty? And how you deal with these sort of tensions and those kind of extreme positions on either side of that ruler are included here. So take a look at those. You can pause the slides and think about that. Think about that when you do the assignment. Right? Do you ever deceive your sort of significant other or friend or family member? Do you do it for altruistic reasons, to spare their feelings? Yes, that haircut looks great on you. Right? Or are you trying to evade something? Oh, I don't know if I can tell you where I was last night. And is it very self-serving, where you lie to sort of promote yourself or to move forward in a relationship at the expense of another person? How do you gain compliance in relationships? We mentioned in one of the first sort of slideshows is that all communication is persuasive. How do you get people to sort of be persuaded to do what you want them to do? Right? Do you pre-give? Give the person something in exchange for doing something later on? Do you put the other person in a mood by liking them and doing things they like, knowing that that'll be easier to get your compliance? Do you promise them to do something in exchange for doing something else? Do you threaten them? Not the greatest way to gain compliance, but sometimes it works. What about your feelings of guilt? What about esteem, where you give people recognition or praise for what they've done in hopes that you'll gain compliance that way? Or you owe me one. Hey, I picked you up at the airport. You got to do the same for me next week. Relationship power also becomes extremely important. We're going to talk a little bit about power and leadership in small group when we have that lesson. But the ability to control what happens and make choices for yourself or others. Right? You have expert power. People come to you because you know all about cell phones or cooking. Right? Are you a good, loyal friend who's been friends for a long time and people come to you because you have referent power? What about reward power? So your boss might have reward power to give you something that you want, maybe give you an extra money, a raise, maybe give you vacation time. What about coercive power? Again, forcing you to do things to gain compliance. And what about legitimate power? As a teacher or somebody like that, you have legitimate power over someone. As a coach, you have legitimate power based on your position and relationship you have with other people. So generality is about sort of communication in interpersonal settings. Men like to report and compete to gain attention and maintain positions. Researchers also show that women like to gain rapport, maintain relationships, and reflect and build community. Again, these are sort of generalizations, but sometimes they sort of have a ring of truth to them. Do you have these interpersonal skills? When you engage in conversation, do you have a sort of a heartfelt conversation with people? Or do you just sort of deal with small talk? Right? What about questioning? That's going to come up really important in the interviews, which we'll talk about in another lesson just a few minutes after this one. Okay. Do you encourage people to open up? Do you help discover other people's attitudes by questioning? Maintain the topic? Do you direct the conversation? Do you clarify meanings? I just asked a whole bunch of questions to see if we could get this thing going and keep this interpersonal thing going. All right, what about your listening skills? We talked a little about this earlier as well. Do you have concern for other people's opinions? Do you stop and listen to them? Do you avoid making assumptions when people start talking? Do you give people a chance to explain what's going on? What message is needed in response? Does someone just want to talk to you and vent, or do they want you to come up with a solution for them? Make sure to notice their nonverbal communication. What are they looking like? What are their hand gestures? What's their body posture? All those things we talked about in nonverbal communication. How far away from you are they? So think about those things and what that means as part of listening. And then the prayer of St. Francis, you probably heard it before, especially here at Madonna, since St. Francis is our patron saint. Right? You're going to have conflict. You're going to have conflict in your group. We'll talk about that as well when we talked about small group. Right? And usually it's conflict over goals. People disagree about what you want to do. You're feeling Italian restaurants, your friends are feeling more Mexican. Right? Or maybe it's resources. You don't want to drive again because you're low on gas and you don't have money for the fill-up. Right? It's also about decisions, making decisions about where you want to go to school, what classes you want to take. So you might have conflict with your parents about that and what they're going to pay for. And what about inappropriate behaviors? When you're online, if someone's doing something nasty online, do you call them out on that? How do you handle conflict in that kind of situation? Different levels of conflict also arise. There's latent conflict, where one person sort of sees that there's a problem, but the other one may not see it. All of a sudden, in the third level, you have some kind of problems to solve, where both parties see, hey, maybe we need to sort of discuss this. Hopefully before it gets to dispute, where you have destructive comments and you say things you don't want to say. Right? Do you seek help then in stage 5? fight or flight? Decide that this relationship is worth fighting for, or do you sort of run away from the relationship and say, nope, the benefits don't outweigh the problems? And do you become intractable, where you sort of just dig in your heels and no matter what happens, you're not going to sort of resolve the conflict? I'm really good at avoiding conflict, so I try and ignore, sidestep, or postpone conflict. So I deal with conflict a lot with avoidance. Do you accommodate, though? Or you try and smooth over to make sure everyone else's feelings are okay? Do you compromise, where both parties feel they lose a little but gain a little? Or do you compete and sort of up the ante and decide, I'm going to sort of dig in and not deal with the conflict, and I'm going to win no matter what? Or do you try to create a win-win, a collaboration, where both parties feel that they've gained something from this kind of conflict and both feel positive about it? There's some videos you do, and there's an assignment to deal with that as well in your assignment folder here. Right? Are you assertive? Do you stand up for yourself without damaging others? Do you describe, express, specify, and the consequences? Are you a negotiator, price line negotiator? Do you go to arbitration, where you have a third party make the decision? Do you want to be a lawyer, so you go to litigation, where there's evidence presented and maybe a trial? Or do you go to mediation, where the neutral person sort of facilitates the communication between the two parties? All right, next we're going to talk about the interviews.